Welcome everybody to another Saturday satsang. Thank you for joining. I'll start by reminding people that the satsang schedule has been updated. So there'll be another satsang next Saturday on the 22nd of June. And that will be followed the following Saturday by the intensive, which is not broadcast to the public. So if you wanted to be part of that intensive, which the topic of which is meditation, and it's an ideal follow-on from the previous intensive, which was separate to non-separate recognition. We'll focus very much on the practice of going deeper in meditation. So there'll be 1 or 2 meditation sessions in each of the 6 online sessions. So that will start on the 29th of June and run for 6 consecutive days. And then there are 2 more public free online satsangs, the standard Saturday satsangs in July on the 13th of July and the 27th of July. And in the next few days, hopefully, the details for the 3-week retreat to be held in Bali from the 10th of October to the 30th of October should be online. So that's a sum up of the upcoming events. So the last intensive was, as I've just mentioned, on separate to non-separate recognition. And so I thought that would be a good topic to go over in today's satsang. The only conflict I have is that I've been speaking about that side of the seeking, which is the awakening side, the realization of the self for oneself, and coming to know directly through experience that what we are at our core and what life is, the experience of life is essentially awareness and different manifestations of awareness arising in awareness. So that realization is a radical shift in perspective, shift from the perspective of a separate material objective subject. There's the irony, an objective subject. So the shift is from knowing myself as an object and seeing many objects outside of myself, separate from myself, where the only feedback we have about the world, the objects outside of us, is through the senses. And the senses tell us that the objects are objective. We can see them, we can hear them, we can touch them, smell them, taste them, and they are at a distance from us. They are not what we are. And what knows them is experienced as this body. So we know ourselves as the body, which really is an object also. And so we have this subject-object relationship. And the sensing is sort of in between the subject and the object. So there is sight in between the subject and the object. That's what sort of links the two. Or there is hearing, or smelling, tasting, touching. And the radical shift that can happen is to know the world as experiencing happening. that the apparent objects, including the body object, get seen from a different perspective where they are known to be transient, ever changing modulations within consciousness. And it is known that the reality is the unchanging consciousness rather than the changing modulations that arise in consciousness or awareness. And a very significant characteristic of that knowing is that what I am, the sense of what the real subject is the formless awareness itself. And so that leads to a recognition that all there is awareness or consciousness. The objects are awareness or consciousness in expression. And as part of that awakening, it or what precedes that awakening often is a description that life is a play of consciousness, that life is a creation within consciousness, and consciousness is synonymous with mind. And so we could say that mind or consciousness or God is thinking life into existence, moment after moment after moment after moment. Not thinking in the linear thought way that we are familiar with as human beings, where we think about something that happened yesterday, or we think about how we will approach a problem in the future, because that thinking is a thinking of words. But when we talk about God thinks life into existence, it is more akin with a creative imagination, you could say, where God imagines source or consciousness, universal mind, imagines the universe into existence, imagines the universe into existence whereby the particular unfoldings of the universe, and from our perspective, it's the unfoldings on Earth in our circumstance, those unfoldings are the imagination of source. That's what is referred to as destiny. Destiny is that which source imagines into existence, which includes your feelings and your behaviors, your actions, your thoughts, the thoughts that we know as the narrative of sort of word-based thinking. All of it is there because it is the imagination of God within God. So in this context, God is a label for source or for consciousness or for universal mind, and not some universal mind synonymous with what we might think of as the source of mind in a human being, which might be, you might think of it as the brain. So this is mind, and that's all there is, sort of like a cloud of mind, but not even a cloud. A cloud in itself is also form, but there is mind or consciousness that has no form, and all apparent form comes into existence within that mind as a manifestation of mind. And to help allow us to understand what manifestation of mind within mind means, we can describe it as the imagination of God very much like a night dream is an imagination or a manifestation in mind. And we all have our own first-hand experience of how a night dream spontaneously manifests in mind, and time and space come into existence in an instant. In the dream, time and space becomes the framework, you could say, of the imagination in consciousness, the creation in consciousness, the dream in consciousness. But that time and space framework isn't the fundamental or the ultimate framework. The ultimate framework is mind, consciousness. That is the canvas, the background, the container. And that is God, is that formless universal consciousness. And in traditions like Advaita Vedanta, there is nothing except mind or source or God, nothing outside of mind. All there is mind. So if the universe gets manifested as a spontaneous creation in universal mind, then universal mind essentially becomes that manifestation, and there is nothing beyond mind, nothing, no time and space outside mind. So mind is not existing as an object within a reality of time and space, but rather time and space, as we know it, the universe of time and space, has spontaneously come into existence within the timeless, the formless, the infinite consciousness or awareness that is God. So when we talk about one's destiny, we're really talking about a sub-thread, one thread that makes up the tapestry of life. So God has imagined into existence the whole of time and space and everything that happens in it. And your life, the path of your life, makes up, along with all the other paths of the other people and animals and inanimate objects in life, each destiny is really looking at one subsection of the overall movement of life. So we could say that from the beginning of time to the end of time, the creation has happened. And so when we say, is it God's will? What we're really saying is that written into the story of life? Is that written into the creation, into the dream? Is it God's will for you to have children or be successful at work or be ill or healthy? Your destiny unfolds exactly as it is determined to unfold as part of the creation. And the surrender to the unfolding of life as it is destined or as it is inevitable means a surrendering of the egoic sense of self in exchange for God's will. It is surrender is a realization that I am not the creator of life, but rather the one being lived. I am the one being taken through life. Now, for some people, that notion is very unsettling, unappealing. And that's usually because the egoic sense of self is strong, and the egoic sense of self believes itself to be separate and independent and in charge of its destiny, which it doesn't see as destiny. It says, I create my destiny. It sees its completeness being in outcomes. And so the sense that, or the notion that we are not in control of the outcomes is very threatening to that psychological self. Now, the good news is that psychological self is a deeply ingrained set of beliefs and thoughts and ideas that we didn't, we didn't set those beliefs and thoughts in place, but rather they got set layer upon layer as the unfolding of life, as we develop, and as the intellect forms and we learn how to speak and learn how to hear, we absorb information from the outside. We conclude things about who we are based on the experience, and we conclude things about how life works based on the experience. Unfortunately, life is seen and life is created in a way that forms certain conclusions, all of which are part of destiny. If they happen, they're part of the creation. And those conclusions are misguided. We have misguided conclusions about who we are. We have misguided conclusions about how life happens, the cause of life. So essentially the misguided conclusion about who we are is, I am this separate body. There isn't a recognition of the consciousness that gets covered up. There are ideas and beliefs about where my completeness and my contentment, my okayness in life will eventually come from, outcomes in the future. And so all of those ideas and conclusions just get laid down. We might think that we are creating those conclusions, but really they're happening. And that is the creation and the existence of the psychological self that is pretty fragile, and its nature is not one of contentment or peace or fulfillment or sense of purpose. Its nature is to feel incomplete, to need to seek things in the future. Its nature is one of regret for the things that didn't go right in the past, and fear for the things that may not go right in the future. There is usually a lot of judgment and complaining about what is happening in the present moment. And so our uncomfortableness in life is a result of this false identity, false self, the small self, you could say, that gets put in place. And that is what lives its life. That is what is essentially reacting to life, a set of beliefs that react to the circumstance in accordance to the structure of the belief. So I need pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. I need, as part of that pleasure, love. And so when life doesn't deliver that, the set of beliefs essentially explode in response to not getting what the belief believes it needs in order to be complete. So this is actually very good news, because if what made us feel uncomfortable in life, not at home, if what made us feel that way was our true nature, then these talks would have no relevance. They would just be pie in the sky, optimistic delusion. Because if our nature is such that we feel incomplete, discontent, unfulfilled, purposeless, not at peace, full of suffering, if that was our nature, then the opposite wouldn't be available. It just so happens that what we can call the true self is very different in nature to the false self or the small self. Its nature is completeness. Its nature is not to be dependent on form or outcomes. The essence of the true self is peace and contentment and fulfillment. It isn't lacking. It doesn't need to seek. And that's what satsang is there to remind us of. And because that's our true self, then we could say it is our birthright to be that. We aren't missing anything. It is our nature, and so it is there. It is covered up. And the dissolution of that which covers it up is the process of revelation. So I mentioned at the beginning when I suggested that I would speak about the topic of the last intensive, that I was a little bit conflicted because I've been speaking about this awakening aspect for quite a few weeks now. And there's something inside that says, I want to get back to the conceptual framework of non-doership and attachment to outcome. I don't want really to leave it unattended for so long. And yet, when speaking about the awakening, it also becomes very clear to me that unless that's spoken about and the nuances that can reframe life in a way that can allow us, one, to just think about life differently, and then that thinking, that even having a different model to contemplate, to consider as, wow, even if it's not true, it's an interesting idea. I would suggest that it's more than just an interesting idea. It is a description, an idea that can lead to a realization of life from that angle, where it becomes appreciated. And we see this more and more in online talks of people who aren't seekers, really. They're, let's say, philosophers or scientists interested in topics like consciousness, or ethics for the philosophers. And they have no they have no experience, no first-hand experience of this perspective of life. And so often, um, a lot of the descriptions that are put forward from uh, seekers or people who have gone through the seeking process and have experienced something, the interaction is one of, oh, you're talking nonsense, until such time as someone like a scientist has an awakening, and then their research is completely informed and guided by their own experience. That obviously gets them to look at things and consider things that prior to the awakening was just not how the research or the scientific contemplation was being guided. And so without these descriptions, even a seeker, can get stuck thinking it's about the intellect. Now, is it about the intellect or is it not about the intellect? If it's not about the intellect, why all the concepts? And it's a bit of a paradox. It is the intellect or the intellectual ideas can inform one after awakening. They can inform and allow for a deepening into the awakening to happen, what we could call integration, where a lot of the misaligned ideas get refined such that they align with the awakened perspective that has set in place, or they can inform prior to awakening in such a way that the different aspects that we can start to observe as seekers and need to understand become delineated and allow us to sort of unpick that ball of threads that have been very tightly knotted together and start separating it out into its different parts, where we start to become familiar with our own suffering in its different forms, guilt and blame and pride, worry, expectation. Maybe start to see that the guilt, blame, and pride is based on the belief that I am the doer, not anything to do with God's will. So if I am the doer, then there is guilt for those things that happened in our life, in our destiny, that weren't as we would like. There's blame towards the other, and pride for those things that did happen in our life that delivered good results. And it's all claimed as my doing and the other's doing, the other as a separate doer. And so those descriptions can start to shine lights for the seeker onto the important aspects. And as the landscape becomes understood intellectually, and the intellect is also given descriptions that talk about peace of mind being the ending of suffering. So as we start seeing what suffering is, seeing that it is the intellect that creates the suffering, what we could call the thinking mind, that thinks along the ideas of doership and attachment to outcomes and trying to find solutions. And in the descriptions, in the information that the seeker is given from within the framework, the teaching framework, the intellect might catch on at some point that it needs to stop. Now, it can't choose to stop, but a stopping can happen as this unpicking of the very tightly knit mess of threads that it was a inconceivable bundle, as that gets separated out and all of the lines, all of the threads are hung in their correct order, then the incessant habit of the thinking mind tends to be affected. And we then might find that a cutting off of suffering thinking starts to happen. A different set of interpretations may, for a while, take the place of the suffering. For example, we might say, actually, this happened because it was destiny, my destiny and the other's destiny. So we might have a narrative like that for a while that interferes with the blame. And then even that narrative, that new concept that we have, at some point the intellect says, even that is not necessary. Once it becomes understood deeply because of that narrative, maybe that narrative is really the working mind, the more useful part of the intellect, reinforcing to itself and reinforcing to the system what is actually happening. And then at some point, the old narrative has fallen away and the new narrative isn't needed anymore. And so we're just left in silence. Attitudinal silence. Attitudinal silence to the inevitable circumstance that still continues to happen. And that silence is not only a silence of the intellect, but it's an opening up of our beingness. They happen simultaneously because the obstacle of suffering, the obstacle of the thinking mind has faded away, dissolved. And that in itself opens up the dimension that previously was covered up. And so there's not only the silence of the intellect, but there is a resting in our own being, which is sometimes described as turning inward, to know that which already exists and is already at peace and complete and just needs to know itself. And in knowing itself, in turning inwards and resting there, that knowing is a knowing that that is what I am. And it's not a knowing. So once again, the wording in the different teachings can be deceiving, because our use of the word knowing might be, oh, I know a lot of information. So it's intellectual knowledge. But this knowing is a direct knowing. So we could start to point at what knowing with a capital K, or understanding, or also understanding is can be confusing, the word, because we think of intellectual understanding. But with a capital U, understanding, or a capital K, knowledge, is pointing at a direct knowing, which is not intellectual. It is where we have stopped thinking that we are, let's say, a dog, if we identified as a dog, and suddenly we realize, oh, I was never a dog. I was always a person. Now, that's just an analogy. In this sense, it's a waking up to the fact I was never what the thinking mind said I was. That was the psychological self. And that psychological self is very much linked to the physical body and everything that the physical body is doing in life and everything that other people are doing to the physical body. And the waking up is, oh, I was always this essence that is the presence of the present moment. And that is known experientially, not as a thought, but as an experience. So similar to, we can talk about the taste of strawberry, and then we can have the taste of strawberry, and there are two different forms of knowing, one much more direct. And then we have to realize even that knowing of the taste of a strawberry is not direct knowing, because it is through the senses. Whereas the knowing of oneself is awareness, aware, because that's what awareness does. So awareness can be aware of itself, which means it's not aware of the taste of an external object. Like when we taste a strawberry, it is the tasting of an object that is not us, coming in contact with the body, and the sense of taste creating the experience. Now, that is more direct than talking about the taste of strawberry, but it isn't direct knowing. But it gives us a sense that the direct knowing doesn't require us to say anything. It transcends. It is prior to any concept, and it doesn't require a concept to come into existence. And so, where do we start looking for this awareness? That is what we are, that is closer than close. Well, one of the answers is, it is here in the present moment. That is the only place it can be found. And it isn't going to be known through our thinking. To be present, we need to be honest with what is really happening. And to get down to the level of honesty of what's really happening, we need to connect first to the senses, because that's what we're familiar with. Like, we are familiar with seeing and hearing. And so coming in contact with the present moment as it appears as an experience can be the way of us dropping out of thinking, especially if there we have the appreciation, the realization that I can see directly, and I don't need thought to tell me what I am seeing. To be present with what we call seeing or sight, the visual aspect of the present moment, just means to be aware of the various shapes and colors and movement, and be aware of them as experience. It is the experience of a tree, the visual experience of a tree, the visual experience of, if you were sitting in a cafe and watching people walking in the street, or watching people at tables talking, you could be mesmerized and awed by the fact that there is an experience of vision happening, a visual experience. And that now is coming to that's much closer to the present moment. And I would suggest softening your gaze, which means allowing the full visual experience to just be there. We no need to focus on any particular aspect. There can be some soft focusing, but realize the whole visual experience fits into the field of awareness. And then there are a whole lot of other notions that are so presupposed in our experience of life because life has felt like this. So the experience of life has felt a certain way. And so we have these unquestioned presuppositions about the nature of life experience. And those presuppositions are often obstacles to complete presence. So an example of that is here and there. We assume that there is a here and there is a there. We've heard that the universe is unimaginably large, hundreds of thousands of light years across, just in this galaxy, let alone from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. Billions and billions of galaxies, each having billions of stars in them. And we don't even need to go to a galactic or universal scale. We've seen had experiences of different cities in different parts of the world, or different rooms in the house, or different parts of the city that you live in. We've got all of these ideas of here as being a small, very small part of all there is. And so if we have these ideas of here and there, and they remain consistent when meditating, for example, or they remain consistent when seeking for our very nature, those presuppositions can get in the way of the revelation of self. Why? Because we don't treat this as all there is. And we might say, but this isn't all there is. I know that I'm in a house with many rooms and this is just one room. Like, are you sure? What if life is a manifestation in mind? And so we must also hold the idea that life as a manifestation in mind includes the whole universe. What if there is no universe beyond right now, right here, what you are experiencing? So presence with what is means an honesty, means being honest with the fact that you have absolutely no real idea other than how the experience is presented in the past. And you're then holding on to how it's presented in the past, firstly, as being truth, and secondly, as being relevant now. And saying, yes, but this is not all there is. This is just one very small part of the world, and the world is one very small part of the universe. I'm saying you don't know that. Take a night dream where the main character is familiar in its memory with different parts of the world, and it's away from its house. And so it says, to get to my house, I have to travel 10 miles that way. And that's really not the truth. From within the experience, that is how the experience is constructed, as if there is a here and a there. But the truth is, there is just that frame. That is all that is being rendered at that moment, is the present moment as it is known by awareness in that moment. Something as simple as the perpetual assumption that life is as we've experienced it and as we remember it, as we've analyzed it and concluded about it, and therefore saying that there is a here and a there. I'm looking for the self. Well, we here in the present moment, and we can never get to the present moment, because the present moment then includes this idea of all this that we can't experience. So if awareness is going to be aware of itself, it has to be aware of itself as the mind in which the universe arises. And in your experience, the universe, if you're being honest, is what you know. Now, you don't have to form that as some absolute truth. You can just say, I'm just going to be present with the experience that exists really right now for me. And say, in my experience, this is the manifestation in mind. This is the manifestation in the mind of God. So another presupposition that keeps us away from a direct realization of the nature of awareness, that which we are, is the presupposition that what is aware is the body. What is aware of the present moment is the body. And what keeps that in mind is this conditioning we've had about the senses and the feedback that we have so often in life that makes it appear that the senses are responsible for the experience. What I mean by that is, if you were to put earbuds into the ears, then the sound of the experience gets limited. And if you put glasses on, then the appearance is altered. If you cover your eyes with your hands, the experience is altered. When we touch something, we see that the sense of touch happens simultaneously to the hand coming in contact with an object. And so then we have the presupposition that the body is creating or is the source of the experience. That the body is the subject. The body is doing the seeing and the hearing and the tasting and the smelling. So completely understandable why that gets put in place, because the experience has been set up to create that as the impression. But ignorance or life is described as lila. Lila is a play of consciousness, or Maya. Maya is illusion. And when we take the illusion as real, that is ignorance. So once again, we can go to a night dream to see how how an experience, how a manifestation, a creation in consciousness can be created to have very many different or particular characteristics. And so one of the characteristics of an experience is that the experience creates the impression that an object in the manifestation, and when I use the word object, I don't really mean a separate object, but I mean a modulation of consciousness. So a part of the dream, so the dream character is made of dream stuff. And yet from within the dream character, which is not separate from mind, made of mind, it touches the water, and it appears that the experience is an experience that the body of the dream character is having because the hand touches the water, whereas we know that the water and the hand and the sense of the fluidity of water when the hand touches the water, all of that is created as the experience. So life may well be an elaborate hoax. And so what we know is there is experience. And so I would suggest just focusing on sound and sight to start with. Be present with sound and sight, and don't superimpose that sight and sound are happening through the body. With that soft gaze, just allow awareness to become aware of the present moment, including the visual aspect of the experience. So the present moment is experience. There is always experience happening. Life is experience. And there are the visual components of the experience, the sight, the sound components, the smell, the taste, the touch. And those are all there, and they don't require the senses to be there or be true in order for them to happen. And we know that because of the night dream. In the night dream, there is an experience and there is a visual aspect, there are sound aspects, touch, smell, taste. And we know that there are no senses in the night dream. There is just an apparent body with apparent senses, but the whole thing is the manifest experience of mind, the imagination in consciousness. So as we look around and use the night dream as the analogy to help guide us as to what is happening in this present moment, we might realize for the first time that the body is also just a visual appearance along with all of the other visual components. It is part of the visual layer of experience. And that the visual or the experience, what we could call the visual layer of the experience, is known by awareness that may have nothing to do with the body, may be prior to the body. Awareness might be the awareness of the universal mind in which the present moment is arising. And so the visual aspect that there is awareness of it in this moment is known by awareness. You can drop the idea of senses for the experience to be there, that the senses are irrelevant. If we keep assuming that the experience is one where the senses are mediating the experience, there'll never be presence. There'll never be awareness of awareness in the present moment. Now, so much of these pointers are pointers that prevent us from actually having true meditative experience, deep meditative experience. I would say that someone who has a meditation practice and sees themselves as having a meditation practice has probably never really experienced true meditation, because as I would describe it, meditation happens when the meditator falls away. And that really means when identification with the body as a doer, doing meditation, needing to get it right, and also having a residual sense that it is the body that is sitting in meditation, and it is the body that is aware of sounds and sights and various senses of touch. If that remains the basis of the meditation, I'd say meditation hasn't happened, regardless of whether someone sits there for 2 hours or not. And so that's why I would encourage anyone who feels inclined to join the intensive, because these are the explorations that we would be doing to aid in meditation deepening. And in the meditation space, which is different to what we've just been exploring today, which is an open eye exploration of awareness. In the meditation space, often, not that open eye is not also meditation. With closed eyes, there is an exploration of a space that can become devoid of sense objects. And in the absence of sense objects, we can say the world is absent. The experience is, there is still experience. Awareness is still there and is still very capable of being aware of itself. And for a while, there are still some aspects of what we would call worldly experience. My voice is still there in the experience. There might be the sound of dogs barking, or what we would say are dogs barking. Really, there is just sound arising in the present moment. You don't know that there is a dog, but we presuppose that there's a dog because we have always assumed and experienced that if there is a bark, there has to be a dog creating it. With our eyes closed, eventually the external sounds become internal sounds, and then they even stop. And then there is awareness of this vast, spaceless space, shimmering black on white or white on black. It has no boundaries. It really is not what we would call typical space because there's no objects creating contrast. And the sense of awareness can pervade this spaceless space. And it might become apparent that the space itself is what is aware, the spaceless space, this eternal, timeless space is itself aware, and that that is what I am. Now, if the residual sense of self remains, if attention is on the sense of touch that is really just an indistinct sense, indistinct part of the experience. But if the intellect then says, oh, that's my thigh touching the chair, and the thigh is part of the body, and the chair is part of the room, and the room is part of the house that's in the world. And here I am sitting in meditation, aware of myself, the body that came into the room and sat down and set the timer and is sitting here waiting for something amazing to happen. A bit annoyed that there's still a lot of thinking happening. That is miles away from the presence of awareness recognizing itself as the awareness of the formless space. Because the self, the residual sense of self, is being carried into the meditation and is obscuring the self because the psychological self is still at play. So just to conclude this topic before we open up to some questions, I would like to bring in, so if you're walking in the park or walking on a busy street or in a cafe, if we remember that life may well be, as the wisdom teachings have said, a play of consciousness. Consciousness is God, that life is a manifestation of mind or consciousness. All there is consciousness, which really means the world of form is just the experience of form. And experience is nothing more than modulations within consciousness, made of consciousness, imaginations in consciousness. So when walking is the experience, walking in a park, if there is an awe at the fact that what I am is inside an experience, that the sky and the tree and the lake and the birds and the breeze and the sun and the body itself is all inside experience. And what is aware of that is not the body, but the experience itself. And the uh, the fundamental essence of experience is awareness or consciousness. So what we call experience is just the content that is changing. The colors change, the trees are moving, the birds are flying, the body is walking, thoughts are arising. Thoughts are happening inside the experience, inside consciousness. The experience is the content, you could say, or experience is the combination of awareness slash consciousness and the content that awareness has become in this present moment. So the content is not separate from awareness. It is made of awareness. It is awareness. All there is awareness. And what we are is that awareness. And you can be walking in the park, and that is realizing that that awareness is God, and God is aware of life, not out there somewhere, but what you've always known as your experience of life is awareness's experience. So when we're looking for God or for awareness and wondering before the exploration has taken us to realizing how close God has been to us, and close isn't even the right word. Close means not very far. God is at no distance from us. We just haven't had the realization that the awareness that I know as my awareness is God aware of life from this perspective. So we could say life, I'll give some more context. Source, what I would like to refer to as infinite creative potentiality, starts off in its unmanifest form, in its potential form, where it hasn't become. It is not dead nothing, but potential nothing, ready to explode into manifestation. So consciousness at rest explodes into consciousness in movement. Consciousness in movement is consciousness in its imagining function, or mind imagining as opposed to mind at rest. Mind at rest means God unaware of itself, but not dead, but unaware of itself because it is in the nothing manifest, in the nothing state, the no thing. It hasn't become, it is at rest. And so when there is experience of life, your momentary experience, that must be the manifestation. That is consciousness in expression. It is the infinite potentiality actualized as the present moment. So the infinite potential has become this moment, only to become something new in the next moment. And the ever-changing movement of consciousness is the dynamic imagination of God creating this particular manifestation of life. And when we look at this manifestation of life, we could say that it is a manifestation of time and space. So the basis of the manifestation is time and space. Remember, the basis of the manifestation, not the ultimate basis. The ultimate basis is consciousness. So consciousness explodes into manifestation, and that is where time and space has come into existence. And then all form, apparent form, comes into existence within that framework of time and space. And the human being, including ourselves, exists within that manifestation that is ever changing. And so the body is just content changing. It's not what is real. That which is real is unchanging. It is that which is real is the background of consciousness, that on which all experience depends. All of the content, which is the thought of God within God, cannot exist outside of consciousness. And so this story of life appears to be a story of form, and then life, and then intelligent life, such that consciousness identifies with the form of intelligent life, so identifies with a particular body, body-mind organism. In identifying with that body-mind organism, it forgets itself and mistakes itself as the form. At that point, the psychological self forms in place and says, this is what I am, this is what I need, this is how life works, this is what the other is. You hurt me, I hate you. I hurt people I loved, I hate myself. I didn't make the right decisions, which led to pain, so I hate myself more. This is what I need in the future, so we try to control life and control others. And then when outcomes don't turn out the way we think they need to in order for there to be complete, we feel even less complete, more frustrated. We seek further into the future. And so the story of life appears to be one of identifying with form, seeking outward, forgetting oneself, suffering. And at some point, the story includes a seeking, a yearning, an intuitive sense that something is not quite right. And then within that seeking, there can be an awakening, and then an integration process where that awakening becomes stabilized, and all of the conditioning in the body that is not aligned with the reality falls away. And that is the remembering of oneself and the end of suffering. And then maybe life, this manifestation comes to an end. Another way is to see that each moment is the manifestation happening, and then it collapses and remanifests and collapses. And so it is always coming to an end within each moment. This realization, which is part of a realization that comes with the recognition of awareness, being aware of itself, is where the notion of dying to the moment comes from. Dying before you die means a recognition that I am not the form, but I am, and I'm not the content. Heraclitus says, we never step into the same river twice, which means the body that steps into the river a second time is not the same body. So he's pointing at the transitoriness of the content. And then we can go beyond the transitory. Like, what I am is not the content. What I am is the consciousness that is aware of the content and aware of itself. So as you're walking through the park, we can be amazed at the fact that there is experience. And as we start to be able to rest in our own awareness, rest in awareness as awareness, witnessing happening, witnessing life happen, Witnessing life happen means witnessing the arising of experience, and from the perspective not of a witnesser, the body, but where subject-object separation has fallen away and there is just witnessing. And witnessing is the function of awareness. Awareness just does awareness. Awareness of what is, and that is what is meant by witnessing, not by a witnesser, but just witnessing. So I'll open up for questions. And before I do that, I'll just recap, because I really do think the upcoming intensive on meditation is something worth considering. I thought of a friend of mine who I know has been meditating for decades, but it's just destiny that our relationship is not really one of going deep into spirituality discussions, even though he's interested in the topic, but he has his own path. And I suspect that meditation hasn't been described in the ways that I've touched on here. And so it's highly likely that the residual sense of self, the interpretation of sounds being from an objective world, will remain. That's not a likely thing to change unless a teaching really reframes life. And so after decades of meditating, I wonder how deep the meditation practice is. I mean, I don't know, so who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised that a meditator hears these different descriptions, and a very significant obstacle that has always limited the depth of the meditation suddenly falls away, and then from that point on, there's a remembrance of how awareness transcended that identification, and then the meditation has reached a new depth that continues. So there's the intensive starting on the 29th, information on the website. There's another of these satsangs next Saturday, and then 2 satsangs in July, the 13th and the 27th. And the 3-week retreat should be on the website in the next week. That's going to be in Bali from the 10th of October to the 30th of October. So I invite any questions. If anyone's got anything they'd like clarified, this is the time to do it. Hi, Ranko.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
I think there is a problem with the video. I can do it without video, but
you can try it now.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's working.
Yes, very good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Roger. How are you?
Very good. No complaints.
I have a question about egoic sense of self. So for me, ego is always a kind of feeling of individuality and probably connected with separateness. But there is an ego before liberation and ego after liberation. 2 different descriptions. So before liberation, it is with belief systems of doership and attachment to outcome, and after it is without. But still, for me, this egoic sense of self is like very important, not to really disappear. And in meditation experience, I had these experiences that all my body kind of disappears and senses disappear. But at the same time, there was a lot of fear. A great amount of fear happens in those experiences. So I think it is connected with my probably belief somewhere deep in subconscious that my ego will disappear in any way. So I wouldn't be able to function in everyday life, probably without the ego. So what would you say about that problem?
Yeah. So firstly, in relation to the falling away in meditation, and we might think that that experience is exactly how it will then be on an ongoing basis in life. But in fact, the meditation space is a space in which a familiarity with the formless can happen. So putting aside the fear for now, because when the fear is there, it's very hard to the fear essentially disturbs that resting in the formless. So if we put the fear aside, the meditation is an opportunity for us to rest in being, in awareness, and to become aware of ourselves and to be able to rest there. And once that connection is formed, then we can come back to an experience of the world and the body, and remain aware of that which we have deepened into. So that that's something we need to keep in mind, is that it's not so much about the meditation experience being how we live life, but rather something that we become aware of in meditation and deepen into meditation, then comes into the experience that we have of life, which still will include the body, right? So then the question is, what is it that falls away in life? Is it that the sense of separation falls away and we are always in a oneness experience? I would say, no, that's not exactly how I would describe it. What in practice falls away is the suffering that is linked with the psychological self. So the psychological self crumbles as we transcend the psychological self. Now, not because we do it, but as the process starts moving us beyond identification with thought and identification with the reactions that happen. And slowly we find ourselves grounding in that which is more real, we could say, and witnessing any residual suffering. So there is a detachment. So the description I would put forward about ultimately what is the difference after enlightenment compared to before enlightenment. We would say before enlightenment, there was a heavy identification with the body, which really means identification with the emotions, identification with the thoughts, and identification means we find ourselves lost and and feeling that that's what we are. After liberation, there is less identification with the body and less identification with the thoughts. And so that means there is more witnessing of life happening. Now, when there is witnessing of life happening, it means there is awareness of ourself as prior to the body, meaning our sense of self is known to be something different to when heavy identification with the body is in place. And as a result of that, the thinking mind isn't as active or is inactive. So a way of saying that is before enlightenment, there is an ego with the sense of personal doership and attachment to outcome, meaning guilt and blame and pride, expectation, worry, complaints. After liberation, there is an ego without the sense of personal doership and attachment to outcome, which means we still wake up in the morning and see the body getting out of bed. And to some extent, we have surrendered to the fact that life is an experience of being Roger in this case, living Roger's destiny, experiencing life from the perspective of Roger. However, Roger also, there has been an awakening to the essence of Roger, the awareness or the consciousness. So life has allowed a regrounding on a different platform, you could say. A platform that also knows the formless aspect of self. And as a consequence of that, the old thinking patterns of guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation don't feature in the course of the day. There's still biological reactions. You know, if someone leaves a door open and it's cold and rainy, I might, who left the door open? It's, 5 degrees out there. But that doesn't turn into an uncomfortable blame or, worry about things. Things are accepted as, well, this is what's happened. So yes, there is still, we could say, there is still an ego, but the ego has changed significantly, and the disruptive components of the ego are no longer there, no longer active. And I think that comes with a combination of, one, becoming aware of the movements of suffering, and two, by playing with what we spoke about in today's satsang, where we try to move past some of these old interpretations of what the experience of life is, and especially the idea that the body is what is experiencing. A shift from the body is experiencing the world to the world is an experience inside that which experiences.
Yeah, I guess that there's an expectation in meditation experience to be really going deeper every time. So probably that is kind of the problem.
Yeah, that's why understanding the 5 forms of suffering is so very useful, because you will see if there is an expectation, at some point the intellect will say, you're expecting, you're sitting in meditation, waiting for something amazing to happen. And the one waiting, which is the expectation, because I could say who is expecting something, and you might see, oh, the one that is expecting it's a thought, it's an attitude that says, I am going to meditate and I would like something amazing to happen. That is who is expecting. It is a thought. And if you recognize that thought is a form of suffering, it is an obstacle, then the very realization that there is an expectation can move you beyond the expectation, can dissolve the expectation, because the working mind has the insight that there is this movement of mind that we haven't even seen as a problem. It seems like a very noble wish, maybe even like a noble action. I am going to, meditate well today, or whatever the thought is. And only when it is seen, it's just like, stop that. Just allow meditation to be what it is. And that allowing could happen in that moment when the expectation falls away.
Yeah, I had a very interesting experience from the last year retreat, Slovenia, if you can remember.
Yes,
After
sure.
that, there was like 2 or 3 weeks, like total peace of mind. Really, I somehow aligned with all this, and there was really different experience of life in a way. I was just witnessing everything. Everything was like not going smoothly, but in my sense, it was going smoothly, even though it was painful situations, and everything was in flow. But it happened for a limited period of time. And then some other layers come up, and I have to work with my feelings and stuff like that. And sometimes it happens that it is also an expectation for that experience, for that glimpse to happen again. So I have that problem from time to time. So this is helpful.
Yes, well, that's good. Well, it's good that you had that taste. That's how life can be. And yeah, I guess this will be your challenge, is because that can be very tempting. We have the experience and then we want it again, because it's obviously got its upside. It's the end of uncomfortableness is wonderful. But yes, if you see how you understand, obviously there will be an attachment to that, because it is it it's it's optimal, but that attachment is not helping. It's a block. So surrender means you surrender. What if your destiny was just to have it once in your life? That's where you go, and you go, okay, so surrender to that means that my craving it is not going to make me get it, but actually while I'm craving it, there is this other uncomfortableness. Now, if that's there, it's because it's destined to be there. But in that moment when you realize it, that realization that the craving is another layer of uncomfortableness, in that moment, that is probably how destiny leads to the end of that craving. Right? When you have the thought arises, this craving is just adding an extra layer of uncomfortableness.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Franco. All the best. Sylvia, hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I don't know how to do the camera. Okay. Can you see me?
No, not yet. But
Okay, I can leave it like that. Hi.
Okay.
I have a
Hello.
hi. I'm second time on your satsang. So I am curious. I think you have mentioned in some of your recording or somebody else, and it's kind of linked to the discussion that we just had it. I would like to hear your explanation regarding, you said something like, we all have a potential to find the truth or be enlightened or whatever we call it. But we have also our own capacity. Can you explain this, please?
Are you referring to when I said it's our birthright to be at peace? Because it is
yes. I don't remember because I listened on YouTube several of them. I don't remember precisely, but there was something that resonated in me. So I was hoping to have an opportunity to discuss it with you.
Yeah, I think I don't really remember saying it, the limitation part today. I did mention the birthright, but in other discourses, I've probably said, look, we're not missing anything. It's not like we were born without a leg and our what we're looking for is to be an Olympic sprinter. You know, if you have no legs, then being an Olympic sprinter is not your birthright, let's say.
Yeah.
Whereas a human being is not missing the crucial element of that allows us to be at peace, because the element is awareness. It's the very core of what I would say the core of the human being. And so we're all aware. However, we each have our own set of obstacles or things that cover up the ability for awareness to become aware of itself in the many different human manifestations. So even though it's our birthright, it's not necessarily our destiny. So I think that's sort of a fact, but I wouldn't focus on the fact that it may not be our destiny. I think we have to keep that in mind, because otherwise we will just crave it without any mediating factor. And at some point, all the way along in the journey, we have to understand we are where we are and it's unfolding the way it's unfolding, because ultimately life is destiny unfolding. And so it will happen as it's destined to happen. But Ramesh used to say, when talking about this topic, it's our birthright and there's no reason to be pessimistic. God has clearly put you on the path. You're listening to satsang, you're asking these questions. There are billions of people who are not interested in this at all. And so Ramesh used to say, a seeker is God's favorite. So he's taking you this far. Why would you think he won't take you all the way?
Well, I can react to that. As you said, like, I was on the path through all my life. But there was a moment when it was a COVID situation, so there was perhaps much more time, where I was really very, very much pulled into these things. So I was for hours and hours daily, listen satsang, read a book, watch anything, talk about that. It was really a kind of a crash course. It was on the top of my mind in the morning. I even dream about that. So I was really very much pulled in. And I come to the point when I can see that there is only one, and that everything is happened. And in this process, I also came to the understanding and really seeing that there is nobody to want it to be enlightened or whatever, that it's not in my hands anyway. But at the same time, I feel that after these 2 years of really very intensive work, spiritual work, if I can call it work, I didn't work, but okay. This kind of pull of desire or whatever really kind of like diminish. I would not say vanish, but diminish. And I'm now in the phase of my life where, okay, I have all the stuff like, taking care of the family or doing my business and stuff like that. But I have tried to watch out really and observe the body, and there is no pull. And on the contrary, like I was watching honestly like several satsang in a day, in a car, shopping, always headset and always listening. And now if I have to choose to do that or go and sit in silence or walk without no music, no talking, nothing, I choose that. And of course the ego is telling me like, you should do something and all this. But at the same time, I do understand there is nothing to be done. So that's why I am saying maybe I have reached my capacity in this life. But on the other hand, I also don't want to give up, that easily kind of. So if you can maybe talk about that.
Well, the culmination of the seeking is the end of suffering. So we have to keep that in mind. I mean, because you could perpetually think you need to keep seeking, right? But if suffering has diminished, then the fact that seeking has slowed down might be just a consequence of the fact that the seeking has diminished, the suffering has diminished. So I would ask you, have you found that there is more peace of mind?
Absolutely. Yeah. I call it like it's kind of a sweet dullness. It's sweet to be here, but it's kind of an dull. There is no drama as used to be.
So I'll give you an example of something that happened to me after, I would say, a lot of the awakening and understanding set in. I had a book that I had. It was from Osho, and it was called the Book of Secrets, and I had got it several years earlier, and people had recommended it, and so I took it away with me on a holiday one time, and I started reading it, and it's a lot of exercises that are aimed at awareness, like mindfulness and awareness. And I got to page 109, and there's a lot of exercises, maybe 5 on each page, or so a lot of different exercises to do. And I was doing them, and on page 109 or 108, I can't remember, I'll have a look, maybe it's 108, 109, I suddenly became aware of this sense inside me that felt like I needed to get somewhere, because I was reading all of these exercises about presence. And so the exercises are written from the perspective, let's say, of someone who is unaware of what the exercise is trying to reveal. And then I realized that I'm just doing exercises that I don't need to do, because the state that this book was trying to get one in, of much more presence, has been part of my life for years before that. And so I just closed the book and put it down and didn't open it up again since. So my point being that we can sometimes forget what the purpose of seeking is and just feel like I should be seeking. But, you know, as they say, once you get to the other side, you don't need to carry the boat on your back. Yeah, so you can put the boat down and just carry on. You have to, as they say, chop wood and carry water, which really means you have to get on with living life. As you said, working in your business, looking after your family, doing Sylvia's destiny. And if peace of mind is there, then that's good enough.
Okay, so it's not like, yeah, it's just check up my body. I'm like check or my body, and the sensation of the body is very good. A kind of indicator to say it whether I want to do this or not, whether I am pulled to listen or just sit in the silence or whatever.
It's a very common phenomena for once it all makes sense, then listening to the descriptions, it's like blah, 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 you know, really, it's like, I don't want to hear those descriptions. They were very useful at some point, but now it's just blah, blah, blah. So I wouldn't be at all concerned about that impulse falling away. It needs to fall away. You know, there's a saying in Buddhism, if you come across Buddha on the road, kill him, which really means, you know, once Buddha and the Buddha's teachings have served their purpose, they're of no use anymore.
Beautiful. Yeah, because there is, of course, I understand that each of us has a different destiny, and perhaps I'm not predestined to be a teacher. But when I'm talking to teachers, and I know them quite a few, I can see if I look, for example, video 10 years ago or 5 years or even 2 years ago, I can see that they have somehow deepened, if I can give the name of that. And I feel like I'm just living life. I enjoy it. I'm very happy to have experience of life, and that's it. And of course we are trained in the mind that there always has to be goal. But if there is no the goal and you enjoy it, but you know, it's always coming back in your like, well, maybe you should read a book more because you are stagnant or something.
Yeah, I think we have that doubt persists from time to time. If we have an interesting or elaborate, misguided even idea of what enlightenment is. And, you know, the standard is for our idea of enlightenment to be quite sort of elaborate and not ordinary. And the enlightened masters, they keep telling us, you know, this is ordinary. That's why we keep missing it, because it's so ordinary. And, you know, as soon as we hear a satsang from the point of view of going into the nothingness and becoming nothing and transcending the world, and, you know, all sorts of nirvikalpa samadhi and no body, then, and those descriptions are very useful for certain phases of the seeking. But we're very prone to hear that and say, oh, I don't have that, so I must need to do some more work, and then eventually that will be the final state. And so that's why I think it's so wonderful that Ramesh kept it practical, used his own experience and his ability to conceptualize and link all the concepts in a coherent way, and say the seeker has to ask themselves, what am I really looking for in practical terms? which really means let's put aside all of the concepts that are out there and approach it from our own experience. And what he boiled it down to is you'll find that we, who are we kidding? I just want to be happy in this life until the body dies. And what does that mean? It means happiness means ultimately to be at peace, to have a peaceful mind, a quiet mind, a mind free of suffering. And when we realize that that's really what we're looking for, then the seeking becomes focused. And I know from experience that even having been exposed to the teachings for a long time, when I had the particular peak experience, automatically there was this attachment to that setting in and being how life was known from, on a continuous basis. And then that desire became a form of suffering that hadn't been, there was very little suffering prior to that awakening experience, or that particular peak experience. It wasn't the first awakening experience. And then it was Ramesh that pointed out, Roger, what are you really looking for? Are you looking for oneness? Or are you looking for peace of mind? And I was convinced, because of the nature of the experience, that that was it. And it was only several weeks after that it occurred to me, my expectation is for something that isn't what enlightenment is. And so as soon as I realigned with peace of mind and realized I had that, and the only thing that's disturbing it now is this expectation that enlightenment is something different to peace of mind. And in an instant, the craving for that oneness experience fell away, and it never came back. And so that then allowed peace of mind to reestablish itself. So that's why I ask, how's your peace of mind? If you keep coming back, whenever a doubt is there, and you just come back and say, actually, in practical terms, if I'm at peace, I can't ask for anything more in life, really. Then the doubt goes away, and because we realize, I got lost, I got caught up in the conceptual, which means I disconnected from the practical, which is, your experience is, if you have peace of mind, you'll say, this is good enough.
Yes. Yeah, I have noticed also that when you were talking about that and a year or 2 years, 3 years ago, I had this Nirvikapa Samadhi when I was really high and full of energy, and it was wonderful. But then there were, at this period of time, there were also still a moment of having or be touched by some anger, some emotion, or distress with some situation. But now I don't remember, I haven't had any glimpse or things like that for at least a year. But everything is kind of like a stable, and situation every day happen, of course. And for example, like this week, I had got some, let's label it, bad news, and it's kicked me out for 10 hours. But next day in the morning, it's again like enjoy. I say, well, okay, let's see how this will go, and more like kind of like curiosity. The doors are closed, we will see which one will open. And so it's really much more sustained and peace and light and easy going. So I think that's what you were saying, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you see when you lose that, that can be also very beneficial. Like when we have the periods when there isn't peace, that's when we realize, actually all I'm looking for is that that state where there is that peace of mind that you describe, that acceptance, the non-involvement, you know, in circumstance. That's where you really, from your own experience, go, oh, what I'm really looking for is just peace of mind. So well done. Good fortune.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye. Hi, Maggie.
Hi. I'd like to understand. Oops, tried to put my lower hand. There we go. Excuse me. I'd like to understand how the intensive will be different. Because I've watched a fair number of videos, and and I was at the last intensive, and so, but you're saying that the focus of this one, because there'll be a lot more meditative guidance, I'm assuming. Is that from your intent? That
including a lot of it is actually going to be meditation rather than talking, or there might be guided meditation, so could be talking, but with a focus of the practice, or actually being in the field rather than just talking about the birds and the bees and what's out there. Is we get out there, and so there will be the meditation sessions, one or sometimes two in each session, which might mean that there's a lot of silence in the intensive, but so that for some people that might be a terrible way of spending 12 hours. I don't know. And for others, it might be a great way. There is this phenomena that seems to happen, is that if people are meditating in a group, and the group focus can sometimes create meditation experiences that are not the norm for someone, meaning the group can help the meditation go deeper. So I don't know, no guarantees offered, but I guess if follow the feeling, see what it feels like. Well, thank you, everyone. It looks like that's all the hands. Hi, Nilesh.